Okay. So yeah, people who are just entering gender studies and queer studies. That's what I was planning to, and I have a reason why I thought it would be good to talk about these subjects, because during the last 5 or 6 years of my official career, that is when I was teaching in Aloysius College, a whole lot of youngsters, mostly college teachers, used to come to me expressing their interest to do research on areas which broadly come under the category of queer studies. But when I start talking to some of them, very frequently I'll see that there is this new interest in this field, but an interest that is perhaps not going to bring in any good results for a variety of reasons. Because queer studies is referring to an area that, at least for the time being, continues to be extremely sensitive. So unless someone has a strong political investment in that area, doing a prosaic research project on it could sometimes have adverse effects. In fact, the kind of projects brought in by some of the students who wanted to continue in that field was, somewhat disappointing, or maybe which made me slightly anxious. So in various forums, I thought it better to talk about some of the pitfalls of doing research on queer studies without necessarily having some kind of a strong political investment. I'm no way saying that you have to be a queer identified person to do it, because after all, I did my MPhil on feminist studies. I'm certainly not living the life of a woman. I don't think I'm a woman in that sense anyway. So anybody can do research on these areas, no doubt about it, but it should come out of a stronger understanding and concern about that field, rather than just an interest in something that is currently fashionable. So this is what I would like to say as kind of an introduction to my talk. And this is the reason why I decide to talk. And then in the rest of my talk, I shall try only to clarify two crucial turning points which transformed the scenario of research on gender and the other sexuality. As all of us know, what is called the second wave of feminism, many people identify its emergence as the 1960s, or in a very rough sense, we can say the post-war period. And immediately after the Second World War, or maybe 10 years after the Second World War, when the second wave of the women's movement started. And very soon, it also evolved into an academic field of study. It was known as feminist studies. In fact, in many Western universities, this was a time when Department of Feminist Research, departments of feminist research started emerging. That's a time when we were confident enough to call it feminist debates or feminist studies. Of course, in India, I know that even in 2021, a lot of people are rather reluctant to use the term feminist. They'll say that I believe in women's freedom, but I'm not a feminist. I still hear it, and I don't even know how to respond to it. Okay, because the term feminist is still somewhat a negative term in, I think, places like Kerala. I don't know when it's going to change, or is it ever going to change. But anyway, what we see as we progress from the 1960s to 70s to 80s is that the departments of feminist research slowly started transforming, or at least there is a significant shift in nomenclature, and the department started getting known as Department of Women's Studies. And as we move into the 1990s, their names are changed again. And in many universities, there are now departments of gender studies. In fact, in New York University, I was attached to a school called CSGS. It started as a School of Feminist Studies, then Women's Studies, and then it became CSDS, that is a Center for the Study of Gender and Sexuality. So that's how it has evolved. And this evolution is of crucial importance. Yes? Anybody asking a question? Okay. And this transformation is something that we need to take very, very seriously, and we have to exercise caution there. Because I know, as a research student at FLU during CFL during the late 80s and early 90s, there were so many dissertations coming up on what apparently was maybe feminist studies or women's studies, as that was the transformation period. But a whole lot of them were completely focused on either women writers or women characters, or on a very mysterious topic called femininity or feminine consciousness. Even now, I think if you Google, you will come across n number of books on the feminine consciousness in Kamala Das, the feminine consciousness in Anita Desai, the feminine consciousness in Nayantara Sehgal, etc., etc. I'm not derating those researches, but today we need to consider them as the baby steps. Maybe some of the initial attempts to use gender as a lens to study literary or artistic works. But as we all know, as we have progressed, there are numerous complexities that have come into study of gender. On one side, we have discovered the importance of intersectionalities. In fact, I find it a little boring to be just talking from one side. Can I ask some of the students here, are you familiar with the concept of intersectionalities? You can either chat or you can talk to me. Or are you familiar with the concept? Intersectionalities?
Yes, sir, a little bit.
Pardon?
A little bit I know about
Yeah.
intersectionality.
Can you just tell me what do you understand by
Inter
intersectionalities?
intersectionality, it involves the women from all race, color, creed, irrespective of any differences. It includes women from all the categories,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
also also the women from also the person from different sexual orientation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, say it need not be sexual orientation alone. For
Yes,
example, the one of the earliest to raise the issue or raise voices against the conventional or what was considered as traditional feminism, especially the white middle class centeredness of feminism, were the black women in United States and even parts in UK, where the famous statement by Sojourner Truth that ain't I a woman, because a whole lot of the early debates in feminism was about how the woman is yes yes, exactly. How women are, I mean, treated as soft, fragile creatures. And many of these black women started asking the question, who is treating us as soft, fragile creatures? We are treated like mules. We are made to work hard. We are physically abused. And the white middle class feminism is still concerned about them being treated as fragile creatures. This was the protest that came from black feminism. And also in a place like India, even though rather late, we now know how powerful a voice is Dalit feminism. Because all said and done, the whole Dalit issue in India started getting articulated within the academies only very, very recently. And I know the problem of saying a statement like the Dalit issue or a Dalit question, because it is not an issue, it is not a question that is just related to the people who are identified or read as Dalit. In fact, it is an issue, it is a problem that has constructed the rest of us, the rest of the people who do not identify as Dalit or who are not read publicly as Dalit. The problem lies on this side. So that is why I know the problem of using a word like the Dalit issue. And we also know that from this whole Iranian belt came what is now again an established area within feminist research called Islamic feminisms. Because uh, I'm sure you're familiar with the works of Fatima Fermezi and a whole lot of people. So, I mean, one of the things that became very clear during the 1980s and the early 90s is the inadequacy of white middle class feminism, or even about articulating feminist concerns as if they could be coherent, and they can be talked about without referring to other social issues. And more importantly, then came the tremendously important work of Judith Butler. I'm sure the work of Judith Butler. Am I right? I'm talking to students once again.
yes,
Are you
sir.
familiar with the work of Judith Butler?
Yes, sir. Gender trouble, body that matters.
Which are her important works?
Gender trouble, sir.
Which are the important works?
Gender trouble.
Uh, Gender trouble. Have you heard of another
Bodies
book
that
called
matter.
Bodies That Matter?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
If you
And
haven't, you should look at that also,
Yes, sir.
because it's also all her works are important, but these are in my opinion, her seminal works. Because The Bodies That Matter is also one in which she thoroughly problematizes the concept of the body. So I believe it was the Butler kind of debates which accelerated the transformation of women's studies to gender studies. Even though that transformation had started slightly earlier, in a certain way, Butler was the final word that there is, we cannot really just talk about women's studies, because the more you talk about women, you are once again making them a kind of constructing them as a kind of an ethnographic group, which need to be studied, about which knowledge has to be produced. What need to be analyzed is how all of us, every human being, is being constructed as a gendered entity. That is the reason why today we talk more about gender studies, where gender itself becomes a topic for analysis, a topic for questioning, and opening up the possibility of generating hundreds and hundreds of genders instead of two neatly classified, watertight compartments. We could produce, we will produce, and that's certainly going to happen, many, many, many genders. Because it's also a fact that articulations of the self are the spice of life, however fictional they are. You know, you can't live like guinea pigs in this world. There will be all kinds of colors that we use to paint ourselves, to present ourselves to the world. And that is part of the pleasure of living, so long as it does not reach a level of oppressing or exploiting other human beings. So there should be genders which are not hostile to the rest. I don't know if that's possible, but we should at least strive towards such a possibility. So that is why gender awareness about gender is not a way to do away with gender, but to open up, make it free, so that we all can coexist without causing trouble to other human beings. So this is the new possibility emerged by the shift in nomenclature from feminist studies to women's studies to gender studies. And of course, gender studies also opened up a field called masculinity studies. Not only that, it went to the extent of, I don't know whether that is the extent, there can be new horizons coming up beyond that. But for me, it was a revelation to read Judith Halbertstad's tremendously important book called Female Masculinities. Are you familiar with this book? For a long time, it was not available in India, but I think now it's really available. Are you familiar with the book? The person?
Yes, sir,
yes.
Yes.
Yes. So, what a book like Judith Halbertstad's Female Masculinities is arguing is that giving up femininity or moving away from femininity itself is going into a field of masculinity, because for a long time we were looking at masculinity as a very oppressive, exploitative way of fashioning oneself. But Judith also shows that there can be masculinities, even in the case of a person whose body is read by herself or other people as female. There can be masculinities articulated, expressed, lived through without being oppressive. She talks about how giving up femininity leads to certain forms of gender identity, which she prefers to call masculinity, which is not patriarchal, which need not be patriarchal. So this is the great shift that has come into gender studies during the last 20 or 30 years. Now I want to talk about something that was happening kind of simultaneously with its beginning, roughly, was around 1969, when, now of course there are people who are questioning it, so that's why I'm not very sure, but mostly we have been of the assumption that the sexuality movement began with the Stonewall Rebellion in New York in 1969. But today I'm rather cautious when I say this, because there is an argument that 5 years before that, there was another riot like that, which is actually the beginning of the movement. But since it was not in the big city like New York, and later to get New York the claim of having initiated an important movement, the other was kind of pushed to the margin. Some people argue, okay? But I don't know, whatever it is, whether it was in 1966 or 1969, we know that what started at that time, inspired by feminist movement and the movement of the colored people in America and different parts of the world, was a very important liberation movement. And I consider it important because it has really undermined the foundations of gender and the conventional patriarchal family formations. I'm talking about what initially was known as the Gay and Lesbian Movement, a deliberate attempt to camouflage the presence of the bisexuals in it. Then later, it was known as the Gay, Lesbian, and Bisexual Movement, again trying to marginalize the very active presence of a group of people called transgenders in it. And now, in fact, everybody is a bit nervous about the nomenclature, because it has become LGBTQAI, and then it continues. And it might, from the onset, it might appear rather discomforting that how do we use a term? How do we use a name to describe a certain category of people? But then that's exactly the politics of it. The moment you identify, classify, and give name to a group of people, you create another. They are there and we are different from them. You know the very same old story that who needs another? Because now, for example, in Kerala, there is so much of enthusiasm to appraise a group of people as transgenders. Well, good enough. But one of the things is they always identify only a group called trans women. Very rarely we do include a group called trans men. But the more important thing is, we are so eager to see who are trans women, who are trans men, so that we can also differentiate the rest of us as not trans women, not trans men, but what is used in their terms called cisgender people. And I sometimes feel that, okay, at the beginning of a movement, it is important to play the minority card because they have been so oppressed, so marginalized. Uh, I mean, they hardly had anything that can be called a comfortable life for several generations. That sometimes some of these people will be happy to see that at least now they are given a minority status. But at the same time, any attempt to classify them as a group is also an attempt to ignore, to make ambiguous the wide variety that exists among people who are identified as transgender. Moreover, it is also, and I think that is more dangerous, an attempt to believe that anyone who can be read as a transgender is, what are the terms we use? Normal, proper, cisgender. In fact, in my opinion, what transgender theory is inviting attention to is the wide variety of genders and desires through which the entire population goes through. In fact, instead of creating them as another, I think transgender theory will be more useful if it can be applied to the entire humanity to open up, to free the possibilities of living. Because there cannot be a binary called homosexual and heterosexual. There cannot be a binary called cisgender and transgender. Creating such binaries are just, how do I say, safety measures taken by the status quo to once again hide the infinite variety that exists among all human beings. Okay. Another thing is, this is a question that is frequently asked to me by research students and many other people. So on one side, we argue that there is nothing called woman, there is nothing called man, because gender is socially constructed, etc., etc. But on the other hand, we support the transgender people in their attempt to articulate what some people describe as an exaggerated femininity or an exaggerated masculinity. So how do these two political positions go together? And are we really supporting a neat classification of masculinity and femininity when we support the right of a transgender person to dress or to behave as that person wishes? What is your opinion? I want to listen to what you people think. Any of the students? On one side, see, after Butler, we say that gender is socially constructed. So there is nothing called a woman, nothing called a man. These are all social constructions, and etc. etc. Then why do we support, or why do we celebrate a trans person's right to articulate? I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that, but what theoretical or political justification do you have for that? Anyone? I'm sure you have ideas. I want to listen to your ideas before I say what do you mean by that, Veena? In fact, that exactly is a problem. I mean, can you just clarify? I'll be happy if you switch on the mic and speak to me.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, please.
I'm just giving my opinion.
Yeah,
opinion
that's what.
means what I think. It may not be the answer of your question.
Yeah.
In our society, accepting anyone beyond these two classes, anyone accepting beyond the binary system, that is male and female, is not in our convention. So when someone goes beyond the convention, when someone goes beyond these binary boxes, that is definitely a threat to our society.
Definitely
A threat.
Okay. Yeah.
Threat to our heteronormative society.
Yeah.
And in this convention, if someone tries to establish the identity, he or she or any gender identity needs to be celebrated.
Yeah. Can you come again? The last statement once again.
Means anyone who is trying to establish the identity going beyond these two boxes.
Yeah.
Needs to be celebrated their right, needs to be celebrated their identity.
Okay, very good. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Do you still see? There is some strange thing that came on my screen. I hope you are still seeing me.
So it is there.
Okay. Okay. So let's let's come to this question. One of the things that we need to know is, in fact, I agree mostly with what she has just said. You know that after Butler, dysphoria is right. This gender dysphoria is a medical term, and I don't know how valid it is in the present context, precisely because gender dysphoria is seen as kind of at least an aberration because of the assumption that anyone born with a body that is read as male will invariably assume a particular gender. And there are some people who will not be comfortable with that gender, so their case is considered as gender dysphoria. What are the other things? They actually are coming out of the discovering themselves, so this should be acknowledged. Both the physical ideas can go together because basically, okay. You want this is you've already spoken, right? Or do you want to? Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sir, actually, what I wanted to say is, earlier we have female impersonator. I'm talking about the theater performance side.
Yes, exactly.
We have Bal Gandharva. In a Kerala context, we had Ochara Shivaprasad Velikutti. They were female impersonator, and later studies revealed that they have a strong desire to be. They have a desire to be presented themselves as in another gender. I mean, Ochara Shivaprasad Velikutti, he was born as a boy or male, then he played roles of female, like Vasadatta, Damayanti, that role. So he wanted to stick on to that character. He is famous for his roles. So later studies revealed that he had some sort of gender dysphoria, that is a strong desire to be of the opposite gender. That's what I mentioned.
Okay.
I mean, he wanted to dress up like a woman.
Okay. Oh, okay.
That is now later on people there are drag queens, they cross dress. That's what I mentioned.
Okay, that's agreed. I mean, I wasn't finding fault with what you have said. My question, my statement was actually about what do we understand by the desire to be the opposite sex? Because one of the important, how do you say, revelations of the Butlerian theories is that there is no opposite sex. Because if at all, gender can only be seen as a continuum, each one performing gender in that person's own way. And moreover, we also know that gender is culturally, historically, and temporally specific. I hope, that is clear to everybody. In that case, how can we ever think of an opposite sex without realizing that even that is a kind of a socially constructed imagination? So a transgender person, conventionally speaking, we will say, is born with, for convenience, let's take concrete examples, born with a male body and who wants to be a woman. Number one, the very concept of the male body itself is the product of a reading. Our bodies always either male or female. And what are the criteria that makes a body male or makes a body female? If you go by the criteria, finally, we will reach that the distinctions are very, very minor and flimsy. And then we also know that the distinctions or differences are a product of our intentionality of reading. You know, the theory is connected with that. So when you read a body, you already have a political intention that produces the kind of reading that is generated. So finally, it comes to that there is no body, only readings of the body. And there is no gender, only performances and their readings. So a transgender person is not, that person might articulate his or her, since we don't have any other word, I'm using that, his or her desire as desire to become a woman, desire to become a man, etc., etc. But that is precisely because of the inadequacies of the language, because that person is expressing a desire to become something that is again socially constructed. So a cisgender person's association is also with a socially constructed imagination, and a transgender person's desire to transform is also towards a socially constructed imagination. In other words, a cisgender is not in any way more real than a transgender person. In fact, these are all just using the language that is currently available in a particular society to articulate their self, to fashion their self. I don't know whether I have made sense completely on this, because I was just trying to put in a whole lot of new ideas in a nutshell. If you ask questions about this, maybe I can clarify more. Have I made sense to you? I mean, if it's a class, I could have directly asked you people, but now it's not very easy. Any questions? Did I make sense to you, or should we do it again?
Yes, sir, you did.
I made sense.
Excuse me, sir. Sir, I think we should do it again.
Okay. What I'm trying to say is that, yes, for some people it's clear. What I'm trying to say is that we should begin by questioning our assumptions about a person born with a male body, a person born with a female body. These are the things we say. A person born with a male body who wants to become a woman. A person born with a female body who wants to become a man. These are the people generally considered as transgender. The first assumption we are making here is about a concrete reality of the body. Is there something called a male body? You can immediately point out something like a body with a certain kind of genitals can be called a male body. Does it automatically make it a male body? Or is it the way we read that body? You can read a body focusing on various aspects of that body. Do I make sense to you? That is, it's just a patriarchal assumption that bodies should be read with a primary focus on this part of the body. Any part of the body is a product of the perspective from which we read that body. I don't know whether I'm making sense again. Precisely
Yes,
because we just make a division saying that this is a male body, this is a female body. How does it become a female body? Because we decide the meaning of that body focusing primarily on a certain part or one or two parts of that body. How does something becomes a male body? We read a meaning in that body with the focus on one or two parts of that body. And look at the immense variety of human bodies around us. If we take away these two frameworks to read bodies, then we will see a very different continuum of human bodies. Human bodies which could be read in many other ways. And so, how does a person become a gendered self? That person reads one's own body through a lens that is provided by the patriarchal framework, which is already in place in that person's society. And some people want to break free from that. And that is what leads to what today we describe as the transgender existence. And we must also know that what leads to the transgender existence is also the existing patriarchal framework of a society. Because many of us believe that a transgender is someone who has gone through a clinical transformation, clinical transformation of the body. But on closer research, you can see that transgender is a huge range where people transform their bodies in various ways to various levels. So anyone who is piercing his or her nose or ears is a person who transforms the body, and then starts the continuum till a person who has gone through 100 cosmetic surgeries and completely transformed that person's body. These are all just possibilities of the body, not just the shift from one body to another. It's just a kind of an endless possibilities of articulating one's own body, from doing a small tattoo to surgically removing certain parts of the body. It's just rearticulations of the body, and that's the only way we need to see that, instead of just seeing it as just shift from one gender to another. This is what I was actually trying to say when I talked about the possibilities that is opened up by transgender politics. Did I make it clearer, or did I complicate it further? I mean, are you people seeing me, first of all? I think my camera has just died or whatever. I don't know. I can't see anything.
No, sir, we can't see it.
You can't see me, right? I mean, I don't know how to rectify it, but I think, oh God. No idea how it's happening, but I just leave it. Okay, so this is the new possibility of transgender politics. And what I want to say is that when it comes to research, and when it comes to even the welfare programs that are going on here, one alarming thing that is happening at the moment is the reclassification of the human beings into three neat categories. That is, now they say male, female, transgender, or man, woman as transgender. I mean, as I told you earlier, maybe for the time being, this might be considered as convenient because of the welfare programs that are targeted towards people of the transgender aptitude. But one of the hidden problem of this is the creation of another ghetto. A ghetto which will safeguard the perfect world of mainstream people. Instead, what needs to be liberated, in my opinion, is the immense possibilities that is inside every human being. And that only will lead to something that can be really called a liberation. That is Keshav. So our conception and formulation of sex, gender, sexuality, body is largely human-centric. How would you look at the decentering of human and conceptualization of reading formulated under a post-humanities framework? Well, it is a large project. Maybe in a certain way, I'm actually talking about the first move in this kind of a direction, where we can go beyond, but at the same time, the human existence is also a trap within which we are invariably embedded. So I don't know whether we could completely give up that at this moment. Maybe after a couple of centuries and much more debate and thinking about these things, it might be possible. In fact, I would like to know what Keshav thinks about it. What is your opinion about it?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
So I think there is a problem of more than society. I would like to talk about academic disciplines here.
Yeah.
So I think there is a problem of compartmentalization in the disciplinary framework itself. When when we talk about gender studies, largely we look at humanities and social sciences at this moment.
Yeah.
Now the conceptualization of humanities as well as social sciences is largely limited to the study of human societies and humanities itself.
Okay.
And I have been looking very positively at a shift towards science and technology studies that has recently emerged. When we look at that, and when we take elements, look at the elements and science and technology studies, it's not a very broad category, but still it tries to shift away from humans. So, you know, there are problems in the discipline itself. When we talk about humanities, we seldom shift away from humans. So I think if we try to shift a little away from humans, maybe we will be able to broaden our conception of gender as well. Because, you know, again, there is a term called Anthropocene that has been used very widely nowadays.
Yes.
And, you know, it is because of this anthropocentric approach that has happened in academia over the years. And I would look at, you know, as far back as Renaissance or Enlightenment or Renaissance humanism itself. So the very centering of human that has happened itself informs our approach towards various things. So if we try to shift a little or shift our focus away from human, there is a lot out there that needs to be looked at. The knowledge creation can be decentered, and once it's decentered, I think we'll have a lot to look at.
Okay. I don't know whether I have, I'm in total agreement with that, because I have my anxieties about what you call science. Because science, I don't know whether it has really started talking, it has started moving beyond the language of truth. I mean, my knowledge of science is very limited, or scientific debates are limited. But one of the problems with scientific discourse is its absolute reliance on truth, fact, etc., which is what makes it rather incompatible with the post-truth world in which we exist. And it's two different things when we move away from anthropocentrism and moving away from humanities. I don't know whether they can be called the same. These are two different ways of, because humanities did really open up a possibility of thinking beyond the conventions. In fact, the whole post-structuralist turn is what helped us to question the very concept of a truth and fact and all that. And in fact, that is what I was using when I'm talking about reading the body and all that. So even the even the move beyond anthropocentrism is something that is facilitated by the developments within humanities, I think. So, I mean, but I do agree with most of the things that you say, that we need to think beyond the modern human species to think about the possibilities of body and all that. This is what I think about it. Okay. So these are some of the things I wanted to present to you. Now it's 11:27. If you have any doubts or questions, we can continue with the debates. Okay. Any questions? Or any comments?
Murali sir, I'm Umar.
Yes.
It was nice listening to you.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I have two doubts. One basically is, how much these things play into the into the scheme of the market. Market very much wants people who are like this, who want to, experiment with identities. For example, there's a very interesting book that's titled "Shopping for Identity." Means market wants us to, experiment with identities. Want me to be in the morning a boy and in the evening a girl, and means at night it's transgender. Every time it's market, I think now determines the choices, and it's not individuals who determine the choice whether I want to be a man or a woman. If it's fashionable to be a man, I'll be a man. If it's fashionable to be a woman, I'll be a woman. And it's all decided, I think, to a great extent by the market. When market decides all these things, how much choice do we have? That's my question, part one.
Okay.
And
yes,
I think your response.
I have absolutely no doubt that it is now the market that decides many of these things. See, any new awareness coming up now will be immediately captured or taken over by, oh God, I can't fix this. Okay, is taken over by the market, no doubt about that. And that is one of the reasons why I said that we need to be extremely cautious. You can see the way in which beauty pageants are now taking place for the transgender people. And some of you must have come across this advertisement by Bhima Gold, which is being debated in the last 1 or 2 weeks. For the first time, instead of a woman, Pennayal Punnuvenam was their earlier tagline, but now they have shown a transgender person as their central character in one of the advertisements. Have you seen it? Well, I'm not in a... when people were asking me about the opinion of that particular advertisement, I was in two minds. I mean, I had absolutely no doubt that they are trying to sell gold, and that is their target. But having said that, advertisements are also powerful tools that create social imaginations. So the introduction of a transgender person into such an advertisement, in my opinion, has certain politically relevant points. It is a way of making a transgender person as part of the mainstream imagination. I think that has a politically positive point. But on the other hand, there is also an expanding of the market by constructing the transgender as someone who is gold loving, this thing. A particular femininity is now provided as a model for a transgender person to identify with. I will not criticize the business establishment for doing that, because they are doing their business of selling their product. And in a capitalist society where advertisements are allowed, this will continue to happen. But once again, here, such advertisements and such endeavors are so keen to fix these identities. In fact, what is reflected in such a advertisement is a general desire to fix identities once again, because people will have to be created as knowledge. Once they are created as a concrete knowledge, Foucault says power can be used over them. We can, the system can exert its power on them. So one possibility of transgender debates and the queer debates is that it offers a way out of being created as a concrete body of knowledge. I don't know how it is practical, but the only way to evade power is to be elusive to any attempt that tries to create individuals, groups as concrete knowledge. Market is otherwise going to take over, and then again new struggles will have to come up to fight with that thing. This is one. So I completely agree with Umar saying that market is trying to take over. Market, in fact, I don't know how many of you have been in a place like New York. How New York sells the Gay Pride Parade. How New York has exclusive showrooms for, certain kind of sexual activities, the kind of costumes for certain kind of sexual engagements. So, anything will be captured by the market. And to at least resist it, what is needed is an attempt to break free from being complete knowledges. And this is what I have been trying to argue. I don't know how effectively I have argued it. Okay. Any other response?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, first of all, today's session was really very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And
Thank you.
the first thing is that we were not bound to ask or give response only at the end of the session.
Mm-hmm.
So the session was interactive and it was insightful as well.
Okay.
My one point, it might be my observation at the very surface level, anyone can observe it in the society.
Mm-hmm.
Is that there are categories M2F and F2M in trans women and trans men.
Mm-hmm.
The person who transforms from female to male, as I have observed that they are less segregated in the society.
Mm-hmm.
They are less subjected to be humiliated rather than the category who are M2F, male to female. They are more humiliated. They have their trauma, and so means. Do you think that here again the same patriarchal system works, which look down at female category in the society and the female objects like ornaments and gadgets?
Some of the parts were not clear to me. You are trying to, you said that men who become women are humiliated more often than women to be. Yeah, that's a very obvious thing, isn't it? Anything that is feminine is considered less powerful and less desirable. So a man who becomes a woman is someone who gives up his position of power and who betrays masculinity. Yeah. And a woman who, you see, a tomboy girl, a girl who is a tomboy is appreciated, whereas, that is the conventional patriarchy working. That's a very old story, isn't it? See, even in the eyes of patriarchy, women are lesser beings. So anyone who attempts to be like a lesser being is considered as a betrayer to the system of patriarchy. Okay, that is why. Because a man with I'm not saying that it's a problem, but a man who's a big buttocks will not be laughed at. But a woman,
Yes.
because it's lesser body. And that's why this, trans women are targeted for this. Please suggest some books for understanding. There is this anthology called Transgender Studies Reader, and it is of 2 volumes. Susan Stryker, 5 people have edited it. Susan Stryker is the most important person, and its volume 1 is available as PDF on internet, and volume 2 has come out 6 or 7 years back, and I think these 2 books contain some of the best articles so far I have read on transgender studies. Because in India, I have an anxiety that transgender studies is slowly moving into becoming some kind of a subversion of the earlier women's studies. Clearly identifying a group of people, and most of the time they won't even include trans men and trans women as a category, and they talk about, romanticize the desire of the trans woman to become a mother, the desire of the trans woman to wear jewelry, and there a new femininity is being created. And see, you can imagine what kind of problems it can lead to finally. Yeah.
So can I have one more?
Yes, please.
So as we know that the wave of transgender study is coming from West to India.
Yeah.
For example, we have read that Stonewall riot. That is the very important and crucial moment that started the transgender studies. In India, can we see such moment or incident that accelerated the transgender studies?
What's the last sentence? Come again?
In India, is there any moment or incident that accelerated this transgender study?
Well, see, once again, when I answer a question like this, I have to be extremely careful. I'm in no way suggesting that the West and East, especially the theoretical developments, the philosophical developments in the West and the East, can be seen as a kind of a neat binary. These are all developments happening all over the world. But historically, there are 2 entirely different trajectories, and that history had to be taken into account. Whatever happened in the field of gender studies or sexuality studies, or what today we call queer studies in the West, need to be seen in the context of the evolution of gender and sexuality in the Western societies, particularly in the context of the institutionalization of Christianity and the enormous development of capitalism. Whereas in societies like India, the picture is far more complex, because after all, the India that we talk about was born only in 1947, and it's still, I don't know whether it has become that kind of a very concrete society that we see in the West. And one crucial difference between West and India in the case of transgender history is that in West, for an extended period of time, the powerful social sources had somehow managed to make transgender existence completely invisible. At least from the sources that we now have, in West, they had somehow managed to make it completely invisible. Whereas in India, what we see is the shifting of transgender individuals from the center of the society to the margins of the society and back to the society, etc. Because There was no time in the history of the peninsula, and here I would like to include places like Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and some of the Middle Eastern societies. Transgender identities were still part of the society, maybe in the margins, but they were there. And there are people who argue that there was a time when they were much more acceptable. They were part of the mainstream, and then they were pushed out of the margin with Western education, etc. But the thing is, they were there. And secondly, even though modern Indian society persecute alternate sexualities, sexual practices in India have always been complex and not under the rigid control of institutions like church. Whereas you know that in Western societies, there came a point of time when people could be burnt because if they are homosexual or whatever. Maybe, I don't know, it might have happened in some parts of India, but we don't have a very strong evidence that it was happening all over. In fact, in most parts of India, there were some kind of spaces left where these people could exist, not as part of the mainstream or not in a very comfortable way, but some space somewhere where these things could coexist, which is clearly the reason why there is not just one moment where, like an explosion, all these liberation movements begin. In fact, here it is more scattered. The society is scattered. Desires are scattered. In fact, I don't know whether people will agree with me, but a lot of people say that in places like Kerala, alternate sexualities are a problem only when you identify, when you assume it as part of your identity. In fact, Shivananda Khan has written a letter in which he says that in India, there are men who marry and there are men who do not marry. Their sexuality is not an issue because whether you are married or not, you still have your own sexuality practiced in all kinds of ways. And some men who do not wish to get married, etc., etc. So that is why the difference in history do not make it necessary for a single Stonewall movement or whatever to come here as part of the movement. It has been here, and it is that is why there was only a legal fight here. And on the other hand, you also know that instead of the church, here we have something called a family, which can be extremely oppressive to prevent a person from, say, assuming an identity based on one's sexuality, which need not be also, in my opinion. It's not really necessary that everybody should assume an identity completely based on the sexuality, because sexuality is just one part of it. There are so many other aspects to it. So this is why the West and East things are different. And here somebody has asked a question. Could you please comment on the queer portrayal in films? Has any positive shifts arrived? Well, depends on what you call the queer portrayal. I'll just give you an example. Of course, the queer portrayal, I mean, if you are talking about, I mean, you're from Kerala, I think, no? Jaina Joy? Are you from Kerala? Is there anyone who is not from Kerala? I thought some of the names appeared not from Kerala. For example, in Malayalam cinema, I mean, we'll immediately point out things like films like Chanthupottu and then Liji Pulapuli's Sancharam, and recently Jeetu Mohandas's Mooton as most prominent films with queer portrayal. We can debate on whether, or Prithviraj in the, what is that film called, Mumbai Police, etc., etc. But let me also ask you, what is a queer portrayal? It's just like asking who is a queer person. A person who self-consciously declares that I'm transgender or homosexual can be called a queer person. But not declaring anything can also be a possibility of queer existence, which is exactly why queer is important. For the sake of the people who are from Kerala here, etc. For the sake of the people who are here, let me call your attention to a film which you will never suspect. Probably the director of the film will kill me if I say this, but think of a film like, have you seen a film in which Sheila played Mohanlal's mother, a film called Sneha Veedan? And some of you have seen it, I hope. No? It came 4 or 5 years back. It's a film which shows a man well into his 40s who does not wish to get married and who lives with his mother. And the reason given for not marrying is that he doesn't want to leave his mother. And what happens in the film is, all through the first half, we see this man who has traveled a bit, who was working in the Middle East and all that, boasting to his male friends about his sexual escapades. He keeps talking about, I had sex with that person, that woman, this woman, always invariably about women. But later, a young boy comes to his house claiming to be his son. And everybody suspects, but he is absolutely sure that it is not his son. A person who has had sex with so many women, but he's absolutely sure that he's not his son. And he gives all kinds of flimsy reasons not to get married. At the same time, he narrates an exaggerated masculine sexuality with women, heterosexuality, probably to cover up what more, genuine interest in desire. And there is also a girl waiting there right next to him to marry him, but he never even proposes to her. Can we treat this as a queer representation? I'm not saying that he is homosexual, but could he be? In fact, nobody will see this as a queer representation. In fact, nobody saw it as a queer representation when Deshadanyakkuli Karayarilla was released in Kerala. There were so many reviews at that time. It was never recognized as a queer film. So what is queer itself is a question. Okay. Now, I also don't believe in positive and negative representations. In fact, in recent times, a lot of people were against Chandu for presenting that character as somehow heterosexual. I don't know whether it really shows that person as a heterosexual, but there was a whole lot of it. It is a commercial cinema version. And I thought that was a film which at least introduced a central character who is not quote-unquote masculine, which is the only thing interesting. Yeah, Dasan and Vijayan is something that can be questioned. Okay, I mean, God knows. And there is this Dasan and Vijayan are also, these are all films which kind of play on the neat division between these two. These are narratives created to be sold as entertainment to a homophobic society. These are narratives which are really addressing a society which is basically patriarchal, heteropatriarchal. And they might be perpetuating the stereotypes, they might also be creating small spaces where the society could think about alternate sexualities. So for a society that has been apparently living in complete oblivion about alternate sexualities, I think these have a positive point to make. But it's a very mild positive point. And I can also suggest what is a proper good queer representation. It's very difficult to say what is a proper good queer representation. So films will keep coming when our tastes change, when our attitudes change, films will follow suit because they are trying to sell by satisfying our imaginations. Very rarely do films, maybe very, very rarely can we see a commercial cinema really articulating something. Even a film like 22 Female Costume, it came at a time when the debate against rape had already been strong. I mean, 20 years before this, it wouldn't have come. So don't give undue credit to these filmmakers that they are changing. Maybe there was a time when, Topil Basi or people who tried to make social change through their work of art, but not today's commercial filmmakers who are working in a very competitive field, trying to make big money. So I don't have undue expectations from a commercial institution like cinema to change the world. Okay.
Hi, sir. Can I ask something?
Yeah.
Recently, I attended a session with Nemat Sadit, the author of The Carpet Weaver, the book.
Okay.
So while we detour from films and get into literature, he shared his experience of trying to get it published and being rejected a number of times because people kept telling him that it didn't have enough sex. Now, the book is basically about two young boys who fall in love with each other in the backdrop of Afghanistan. And like Veena said, I don't think we should be confining queer people into a non-heterosexual arena. So in that sense, he was rejected a number of times only because there was not enough sex in it. So how do you take that? What would you respond to something like that?
Well, I'm really convinced that it is quite possible. In fact, I can tell you one experience of myself. I tried to collect the short stories written by very well-known authors in Malayalam, not any author who is queer identified, just mainstream authors, but dealing with relationships, same-sex relationships, or sometimes bisexual relationships, and tried to publish it as an anthology. And some of the famous publishers read it. In English, I was trying to publish. And they all said that it's not spicy enough, because they all expected these writers to talk about heavy sex sequences, which were not there. So there are, that there are, like on internet, etc., there is a market for spicy representations of queer lives. And lesbian lives, my God, it is one of the biggest draw for heterosexual readers, I'm told. That is girl on girl kind of fun is considered as a main attraction. In fact, it also shows the complexities of the human ways of imagining sex. But on the other hand, the commercial viability comes only through these things for the even queer representations. But is it really useful? I also wonder about that. Okay. So that one experience of the writer is quite natural, I think.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
In fact, one of the reasons why Kamala Das's story is so interesting is it. I'm talking about the sandal trees. It's very this is the very distance it keeps from any concrete identities. I find that story very interesting because of that. It is not a lesbian story. It is not a gay story. It's a human story where this one character, I forget the names of the character, Dr. Sheila, and I forget the other name. And one of the doctors is someone who got married to an older man. Then she seduces his former husband and comes close to have a sexual relationship with her former husband's daughter. But her primary love remains the other woman, with whom she had just one sexual encounter, but no sex after that. So it is presenting a very complex sexual imaginary, rather than something that can be neatly classified into gay or lesbian or whatever. And they don't really, and she keeps playing the role also. Sometimes she is never, quote unquote, more masculine attitude when she comes to her girlfriend, but then she also is very feminine, trying to seduce her former husband. So, I mean, somebody like Kamala Das has the the genuinity to explore relationships which are far more complex. Any other response? How long do you generally continue with these things? Have I already tested your patience, or you are
No,
still
we go on
listening?
for a couple of hours, usually till 12:30.
Pardon? Okay.
We go on for a couple of hours, like
Okay,
usually till
then.
12:30.
Good. So if anybody has any response, any other response, we can continue. Now my camera is working. Am I right? Properly? You can see me.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Right. So I don't know whether the questions have come to an end. Is there a moderator or anybody, or Obid, are you there?
Yeah, Obid is controlling the proceedings. Yeah.
Okay.
Obid.
And like, do we have any more discussions pending? Because okay, like, do we have any more discussions or questions or doubts to be cleared?
I don't know whether I have missed any of that questions that came on the chat. I tried to answer most of them. I don't know whether I have missed any. I think most of them I have. Yeah, I think most of the questions I have answered. Yes, Obit?
Yes, sir. So if we don't have any more doubts or clarifications to be done, I think we'll go. Okay, yes, sir. Okay, it was just okay. Yes, if anybody wants to ask something, please do so before we wind up. Yes, so yeah, so if we don't have any more comments or clarifications, I think we can move into the final moments of the session. Yeah, we have a vote of thanks pending.
Okay.
I invite Anita to please deliver a vote of thanks.
Yeah, before the vote of thanks, let me tell you, I am really very happy that I could come to this webinar. I mean, there's so much of interest in this field. I'm really impressed by the kind of responses I received. So I'm happy to see that lots of people are thinking very seriously about these issues. So thank you, Obi, and the Department of English, and Sharif, and Umar, and Janki, everybody, for giving me this fantastic opportunity to address this group.
Thank you so much, sir. We are very glad that you had fun. All right, so we gathered here today on a virtual space to talk about, the various nuances of queer theories, gender studies, and everything. And after a couple of hours of discussions, I mean, I can for sure guarantee that we've definitely traveled past the rainbow, broken it down, and just thrown it out into the world to explore. And I think that really speaks a lot about how productive our session was today. So thank you so much. I know I speak on behalf of everybody when I say that this was an amazingly productive session. So thank you so much. And I feel really, really glad that I'm expressing our gratitude to Dr. Muraleedharan for being with us today. Thank you so much, sir. I'd like to thank our HOD, Dr. K.M. Sharif, Naranan sir, Umar sir, Janaki ma'am, every one of our faculty members for making this possible, for making this session interactive, and to our research scholars for organizing and coordinating this session. But more than that, I'd really, really like to thank everybody who took some time out to be here, interact with one another, and like sir said, put in some comments and actually show that this is a very productive realm and we could go a long way in this space. So thank you so much, participants. We'll catch you again next week with a different topic. So thank you so much for being with us. Thank you. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you, Murali.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I didn't expect this
Thank you,
number of people to come. We had around 94 participants.